Hi everyone, it's Miss Rachael here. I hope you're all well and excited for another fluency in math session. So today we're going to be looking at everything to do with multiples of 2. Now you might think, oh, well, I already know my multiples of 2, but do you? The whole point about being fluent is that you can apply what you know to so many different situations. So even if you think, oh, I know my multiples of 2, first of all, it's good to practice. If you don't practice it, then you lose it. There's a really good saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. And it's the same with your multiplications. Second of all, I'm going to be setting some quite challenging work at the end of this video. So for those of you maybe who are in year 1 and new to multiplication, it may be that you only want to do the beginning of the video. For those of you in year 2 who are feeling more confident, then I urge you to go on to the end because there's going to be some really complicated stuff. Things where you can determine how hard you make the work. So are you ready to look at multiplications? Come on, let's have a look. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be looking at multiplications of 2. So the first thing I wanted to say is, like I've just briefly mentioned, we are all in different places on our learning journey. Okay, for those of you who don't know, the x sign here, multiply, simply is the same as lots of. Okay, so if you've got 2 times 2, it's 2 lots of 2, which is 4. The division symbol is shown here. And this means that you've taken a total and you've shared it out with different groups of people. Now, for some of you, you might be at the place where just learning your simple multiples is the best for you. So 2 lots of 10 is 20. For others of you, it may be that you're ready to apply your learning to harder numbers. So for example, 222 divided by 2 is 111. We'll talk about this a bit later on. For some of you, it may be that you're ready to apply your knowledge of multiples to other units of measurement, for example, money or weight or volume. So for example here, £450 shared between 2 people is 225. This is still learning your multiples of 2. Then finally, I'll just move this out of the way. It might be that you're just at the place that 2 lots of 4 is 8. So knowing that you can use different language. These are all okay. We're all in different places. And the focus of this is to help you all eventually get to the same place at the end. But for some of you, this might take a little bit longer, and that's all right. So the way for you to progress is to first of all start off by practicing skip counting. If you can't recite your multiples of 2, go back to this and have a look. You also need to be able to practice reciting your multiplication and division facts. So as well as being able to go 2, 4, 6, 8, you also need to know that 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, and so on. I've got some useful things to help you with this later on in the video. You then absolutely need to be able to play some fun games. Once you can do these quickly and accurately, you'll be ready to progress on to applying what you know to larger numbers. Is there a pattern that you can use? Finally, you'll be able to apply it to other units, to money and measures, and use it to be able to solve problems. So for example, I have 12 apples. John has twice as much as me. How many apples does he have? That is a multiple of 2 fluency question. Twice just means timesing by 2. So, first of all, for those of you who don't know, multiplication is simply like adding lots of times. We call this skip counting because you miss out the number that isn't in a multiple of 2. So for example, here, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. You can see that our number line only lands on multiples of 2 on the 2 times table. This is simply like adding 2 each time. So we don't say the numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Now division is simply like subtracting lots of numbers. So imagine that you start with the whole number 10, you go skip count back down to 8, 6, 4, 2, 0. This is simply like taking 2 away each time and sharing it with a different group of people. Now it's time to take a look at our multiples of 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I wonder if you notice anything. Can you see a pattern? I wonder if you notice that multiples of 2, are they odd or are they even numbers? How do you know? Could you explain to somebody the pattern that you see and how you know? Okay. Now we're going to count in twos. Each time we're going to do the skip counting. We're going to add 2. Okay? So are you ready to count on with me? Here we go. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Do you think you can go back again? 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 0. Well done. Could you have a go at practicing that on your own? If you get a little bit stuck, just come back to the video and do this bit with me. Now, for those of you who are ready to move on, who have mastered the art of skip counting in your twos, egg boxes are a really useful way to help you make arrays. Now, grown-ups, you might not know this term, but an array is a term that we use to describe how we can represent multiplications. So the egg boxes work really well because you can see that already you will be putting your counters or Lego or marbles or pebbles into rows of 2. So for example, first of all, 1 times 2 is 2. In this array, you can see you've got one lot of 2. 1 times 2 is 2. Could you have a go at saying the multiplications with me? Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8. 5 times 2 is 10. 6 times 2 is 12. 7 times 2 is 14. 8 times 2 is 16. 9 times 2 is 18. 10 times 2 is 20. 11 times 2 is 22. 12 times 2 is 24. Do you think you could do it backwards? Let's give it a go. 3, 2, 1. 12 times 2 is 24. 11 times 2 is 22. 10 times 2 is 20. 9 times 2 is 18. 8 times 2 is 16. 7 times 2 is 14. 6 times 2 is 12. 5 times 2 is 10. 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 2 is 6. 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. Well done! That was amazing. Do you think you could have a go at trying that on your own? Remember, if you get stuck, just come back. Now, children, it's really important that you do try and use arrays to help you show what the multiplication means. By using concrete resources, just like we would do in class, it really helps you remember the multiplication facts. It gives you a really solid understanding. And whilst this might not seem important for 1 times 2 is 2, you might think that you know that. It becomes really important when you want to apply your learning to other situations. So it's really important that one of the first steps you do when trying to do this work is to use things like egg boxes or Lego or pasta and arrange your multiplication. So if you've got 1 times 2 is 2, have 1 row of 2. If you've got 2 times 2, have 2 rows of 2. If you have 3 times 2, have 3 rows of 2. This will really help you later on. Okay, now it's time to practice with some really fun games. So if you've mastered skip counting and you've mastered how to count in your multiples of 2, then now it's time to have a think about the games that you can play. If you've got a set of playing cards at home, these are a really useful tool to help you with multiplications. If you don't, you could always have a go at making your own. The idea is that with 2 or more players, you take it in turns to turn over a card. Whatever that card is, you multiply the number by 2. The first person to shout out the answer wins the card. Whoever has the most cards at the end wins. Now I've put a little note at the bottom here to say that picture cards, for example the ace, the jack, the queen and the king, have different values. So the ace is worth 1, the jack is worth 11, the queen is worth 12 and the king is worth 13. Now I've given you an example here. I've turned over the 4 of hearts, so I have to work out 4 lots of 2, 4 times 2. And of course I know that that's 8. 4 times 2 is 8, but I would have to say it really quickly to win the card off the other players. Another really fun game you can play is a version of rock, paper, scissors. But instead of holding up a rock, paper or scissors, you're going to hold up different numbers. So you would go rock, paper, scissors, or you could come up with your own chant. We are doing 2s. And on the final one, so you bounce 3 times, on the final one, you would show some numbers. Your partner would do the same. So say you've shown 4 and your partner's shown 3, you're going to have to add those together to get 7 and multiply the total by 2. So as you can see here, 3 plus 4 is 7, 7 lots of 2 is 14, so the answer is 14. To make it extra fun, you can try and beat the person you're playing with. Can you say it quicker? Now, if you're getting really good at this, obviously if you've got 2 hands with 5 fingers, the maximum number you can get to is 10 lots of 2. But if you're feeling really tricky, you could have a go at using 2 hands. So if you both have 2 hands up, you could get to 20 lots of 2. Give it a go. See how it goes. Let me know if you like it or not. Another fun game is to practice your multiplications and divisions by doing times table surfing. Now the best way to show you this is literally just to show you. So have a look at this video.
Hi everyone, are you ready for some times table surfing? Really, really easy, but really, really fun. But make sure you don't fall into the water because the sharks will get you. You ready? So you got to stand like you're on a surfboard, legs apart, and you go 1 times 2 is 2. Turn. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8. 5 times 2 is 10. 6 times 2 is 12. 7 times 2 is 14. 8 times 2 is 16. 9 times 2 is 18. 10 times 2 is 20. 11 times 2 is 22. 12 times 2 is 24. Woohoo! We've done it. Okay. Can you have a go doing it backwards? This is where it gets really tricky. Okay, so we were here and we were doing 12 times 2 is 24. 11 times 2 is 22. 10 times 2 is 20. I nearly fell in then. 9 times 2 is 18. 8 times 2 is 16. 7 times 2 is 14. 6 times 2 is 12. 5 times 2 is 10. 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 2 is 6. 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. And we've done it. There you go. Why not have a practice at times table surfing?
Okay, so once you've had a go at playing the games and you feel like you're really secure, now comes the time that you want to apply what you know. By this, I'm basically talking about fact families. Now, I'm hoping that a lot of you remember doing fact families at school. A fact family is when you have one number sentence, and you can tell me everything to do with that number sentence. So, for example, if you have 3 times 2 is 6, what else do you know? Well, you also know that 2 times 3 is 6. You know that 6 is the same as 2 times 3, but also 6 is the same as 3 times 2. You also know that 6 divided by 3 is the same as 2, and 6 divided by 2 is the same as 3. Or 3 is the same as 6 divided by 2, or 2 is the same as 6 divided by 3. That's an awful lot of information to know if you know that 3 times 2 is 6. Could you have a go at doing the fact families for all of the multiplications up to 12? This may seem like a simple idea. However, it becomes really important for when you're older and you start to do things like algebra. By knowing that you can manipulate number sentences like this will really help you become fabulous mathematicians. But then, if you know 3 lots of 2 is 6, you also know an awful lot more. Well, you also know that 20 times 3 is 60. So instead of 2 times 3, you know 20 times 3. You also know that 44 times 2 is 88. You also know that 33 is the same as 66 divided by 2. You also know that 134 divided by 2 is 67. Now, I've given you a range of examples here from different multiplications, but I just wanted to show you how much you know. So, for example, if you know that 4 times 2 is 8, you know that 44 times 2 is 88. It's amazing how quickly your knowledge builds up into bigger numbers. Can you use your fact families to come up with some of your own like this, some of your own examples? It's really important that you don't just think about doing really, really big numbers, but that you also do quite sophisticated numbers. So, for example, 134 divided by 2 is the same as 67. That is more sophisticated than looking at 2,222,222 divided by 2. Just because it's a really big number doesn't mean it's a harder problem. But by doing trickier numbers like this, 134 divided by 2, you'll really work those brain cells and become really fluent. I also want you to think about the fact that you also, if you know your multiples of 2, you also know what twice the amount is or double the amount is. And conversely, if you know how to divide by 2, you know what half the amount is. That becomes really important when you come to answer problem-solving questions. If you're really secure in the previous slide and you want to push yourself a bit harder, you could have a go at applying what you know to different measures. So, for example, 2 times £5 is £10. 2 lots of £5 is £10. Or 100 grams divided into 2 bowls is 50 grams. It's amazing how quickly you can solve an awful lot of problems with something as simple as your multiples of 2. Can you come up with your own examples? Think about pounds and pence, centimetres and metres, millilitres and litres, grams and kilograms. If you're getting a bit stuck, ask a grown-up to help you. Finally, could you have a go at writing and solving some problems? Children find this really tricky, and this is one of the hardest thing that I'm going to ask you to do. I've given you an example, and you can use this as something to start your working from. So, for example, Miss Rachael has 24 apples. She gives half of them away. How many does she have now? Now, actually, it's quite a simple problem when you come to look at it. 24 apples divided by 2 is 12. But having it written out as a word problem can really confuse people. So why don't you have a go at creating your own? Practice with different numbers with this one. So it might be that you say your name and 12 apples and you give half of them away. Use that as the basic structure. And then have a play. See what you can come up with. And finally, I've got one other problem there for you. Is 1,325,478 a multiple of 2? Yes or no? How do you know? Can you prove it? Well, I hope you've enjoyed that whistle-stop tour of your multiples of 2. And I hope you realise that there are so many different ways that you can use the multiples of 2 to solve really tricky questions. Keep coming back to it, keep practicing it. The more you practice it, the better you'll get. And remember, if you don't use it, you lose it. Keep looking for more maths fluency ideas on here from the other teachers in Key Stage 1. But for now, I hope you have fun playing around with your multiples of 2. Bye.